Okay, so once again, thank you. So I teach in Norfolk at Old Dominion University, but I'm not from this area originally. I'm originally from Minneapolis, and then I moved to New York City and ended up down here. And this exhibit kind of brings together 3 different bodies of work, and they're all connected by a thread. And what I have found myself as an artist is that when you find that thread and you keep pulling it, if it's the right thread, it takes you in a lot of directions, but it also takes you in a direction that's something that is your unique communication with the world, something that you understand and feel like you have something to say. So for me, it started with this book. Those are my books over there, and this was my first book, so first full-time project. And what it is, it's county fairs and small town festivals in the Midwest, like in 15 different states. And I had photographed a lot of county fairs when I lived in Minneapolis because I just liked them. And when I went, I found pictures that I thought were interesting. And then when I moved to New York City, I started to really look at the difference in the cultures. And I decided, hey, this is a good project. I'm going to go back. And I spent 3 summers driving around photographing these fairs. And I couldn't have told you then why I was doing it really, other than I really like it. And it took me a long time to figure out why. And it took having kind of an epiphany moment with this to take me into my next body of work. And one of the epiphany moments was here. I don't know if you can see this, but it's at a small town in South Dakota called Stickney, and they were having their centennial celebration. It was the celebration of 100 years of Stickney existing. And they had a parade, they put on a play out on the prairie. And as you can see here, they've got 2 white men dressed in Native American costume, and they're Shriners. And there's a 7th Cavalry soldier in the background. So the panorama that they had also had all this sort of white narrative about what had happened. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, okay, that's just weird. And there are a lot of indigenous people that live in this area. They're not here at this play or this parade, but what would they think? How would they recount the last 100 years of their existence? Not in this way. So I decided to go out and photograph the history of the United States as kind of told on the vernacular landscape. So that's what these pictures are from. This is they actually reenact, there's a lot of reenactments, a lot of just parades, a lot of things I could just find, anything that had to do with history and how history is told. But this was at a reenactment of the Battle of Little Bighorn, and they are Native American kids. So there were Native Americans actually playing Native Americans in this play, and there were white people playing the 7th Cavalry. This is from a parade, 4th of July parade in Philadelphia. And what I liked about it was this, okay, where does the history go? Where does the history come from? Is this really, do we really have our heads off? Are we really thinking about this? So I like the metaphors that this created. And this over here that's called 9 Lincolns. And I had met my first Lincoln at a reenactment in Iowa, I think. And we kind of got to be sort of friendly because we kept running into each other. And then he told me about the convention. I was like, convention? The Lincoln Convention? Where is that? What is that? So I went about 4 different times. It was always at a place that had something to do with Lincoln's upbringing. And this book here is my latest book to come out. And it is from one of the times that I went back after this and photographed them individually and then asked them why they did it, because Lincoln is the only president that has a following like this that reenacts him that I know of. So what I thought was interesting about that, what I took from that was that they admired him, and they thought that he sort of epitomized what American values were about, that the common man through sheer hard work can rise to the highest level of society. And so that's what attracted them as common men themselves. We'll come back to this. So let's go on in here. So come on in, spread out. So we're going to start here. This is from my second book called Using History, which is out on the table. And so this was after I had the epiphany about the Shriners and the Native American costumes. And I started on my 10-year odyssey of driving around the United States, photographing whatever I could find. This is like 5th grade students taking a trip to Ellis Island, learning about the immigrants who had come through Ellis Island. This was an actual reporter from Channel 2 News, and it's a Civil War battle being reenacted on a Revolutionary War battleground. It's really interesting because growing up, I didn't think, you think of history as something that's written in stone, and it sort of is, weirdly, but it changes. It changes in the telling, it changes with whoever is in power. History is just a story, it's not the truth. It's just someone's version of something that happened. And since I've done this project, history has changed a lot. And then in the past couple of years, it's really changing with all the statues that are tumbling. Okay, so when I did this, you couldn't find much about African American history of any people of color on the vernacular landscape. But there's a museum in Baltimore, I don't know if it still exists, but it's called the Great Blacks in Wax. And they had a masquerade ball, and that's what that was from. You would come dressed as characters from Black history. This one is a little bit more sinister. This is in Richmond, and it was a Civil War gala where all the people that were attending it were Civil War on the side of the South aficionados. And it was the first time that they had had something like that in Richmond in a very long time, so it caused a big stir. But this is so curious. So here is somebody who was attending the program, but he was outside directing traffic. And this is a man who is arriving. He was going to be a waiter at the dinner. So it's the layers and how they come together that is just never-endingly fascinating and tells us so much about a society and a culture. Okay, so then we go down here. This is in Lusk, Wyoming, and in Lusk they have a play that they put on every year that was written by a woman and who lived there, and about sort of the history of Lusk. So this was after the dress rehearsal. For some reason, I stopped at the grocery store, and this family was there getting some stuff for dinner after the dress rehearsal. So then this was at the OK, where was it now? Let's see. This was in Tombstone, Arizona, a tourist site. And what really interested me here was it's just the telling, how the story is told. But then when this happened, this is like this was at the end of the project, and this is when I went, oh, I really get this now. So it was shortly after 9/11. This was the cover of the New York Post or the Daily News, I'm not sure. and it was stuck in a car window in Staten Island. And then President Bush had made a statement like, somewhere out west there's a poster that says, there's a saying way out west that says, wanted dead or alive. And I thought about that, and I thought, okay, this could be here, because this is the language that comes directly from that. Now, is this the truth? No. You know, this is one person's side of it, one group of people, you know, the white colonialist perspective that were taken over. And so here you use that language, and it can cause a whole group of people to rise up and understand it. We understand what that means, and we know that that's something, somebody is trying to get us. So we need to respond. So that's the thing with history. It's so layered, and it makes identity. It causes people to know the same facts. Okay, whether it's like your church group, whether it's your neighborhood, it's a group that knows some history, some facts, and those facts kind of bring you together as a group. And that's what happens with the history of a country, too. So when I first moved to Norfolk, I saw the waivers. You've probably seen them. This company was just getting started with this marketing approach at the time. And of course, I saw them and I was like, whoa, okay, this is interesting. And I wanted to go and photograph them, so I did. And I spent a few months just kind of fumbling around and not really getting it right until I realized what it was. And I worked completely by myself. I always work alone. But I brought lighting, and I tried to make like a studio lighting on them. I tried to make it so that the street corner, this is where they're standing, the urban street corner became like this backdrop. And then I went from a slightly low angle because I wanted to be looking up at them. I wanted to elevate them to the place that the important people of society are elevated. So that's what I did here. And then I asked them a few questions. So for example, this is Joe. And Joe says, okay, this is Joe's first year as Liberty. He is doing it to make extra money. He said, he's got to take care of my kid. Joe's daughter is almost 2. Her name is Neva, heaven spelled backwards. Joe has done construction, auto mechanics, and carpentry. Right now, the way the economy is, a hardworking dad like myself can't get anything good. Okay, this is Donna, and it was her first year as a Liberty also. She'd been out of work for over a month. She needed work or she was going to lose her apartment. Donna has worked as a dishwasher at a pizza restaurant and as a recreation aide. She has 4 kids, ages 5, 8, 10, and 12. She's working to get custody of her kids. So here we have people who are struggling in this society. And they're dressed in one of the greatest symbols of our country, Lady Liberty, standing up for the immigrants. So who's standing up for them? They're having to wear the costume, which in many cases was pretty shabby, and wave on the street corner for a corporation to try to get by. Okay, so we'll move on over here. This is from, right now, currently I'm working on 2 really long bodies of work that have gotten very tangled up. This is one of them, and I just wanted to photograph more about the West because I thought of the West as like sort of the quintessential mythology of our country. Everything is kind of based on that, this conquering of the West. But how do you photograph that? What do you do? And once you start in and you're working with just regular people, it becomes really complicated because, yes, there are some evil people, but there's also people of all colors and economic backgrounds that are just trying to get by and trying to believe in something and trying to believe in what they know of as their history and their culture. Like, for example, these ladies down here, this is a family. This is Julie Brady, and these are her daughters. And they're all have been rodeo queens of some kind, expert horsewomen. And Julie collects, these outfits they're vintage, like from the 50s. They're designed by Nathan Turk, who was a big designer of Western wear for country Western stars. So they're proud of that. They're really proud of their heritage, and they should be. I mean, it's beautiful. But there's another side to it, too. You know, what one color did to another color. But you can't fault them for being proud of it. And it wasn't exactly what they did, although some people do benefit from this conundrum. Okay, so here is this guy. This was on a reservation in Idaho, or was it Idaho? Yep, Utah, called Fort Hall. And he was they had a big, huge powwow, and they had Native American relay races, which was the craziest thing I've ever seen. They work in teams of 3. They have a rider. He was the rider. They have a catcher, and they have a holder. Okay, so the holder holds the horses. The rider comes and jumps on, because it's bareback, and then he races around the track as fast as he can 3 times. Each time he has to jump off a horse and jump onto another one, which is where the holder and the catcher come in. And it's just a smash up. I've never seen anything like it. So it comes from their heritage of working with horses, being daring on horses. So it's very important to them. This is a crumbling mural in Oklahoma, which I kind of thought of as just as a metaphor for what has happened to Native Americans. This one I think is really layered. When I first took this picture, when I first saw it, I didn't like it because the composition is so kind of like weird. But then I loosened up and I realized how amazing it was. And I'm not saying because I took it or anything, but because of what's in it, that I didn't even realize everything that was in it at the time. So this was on a reservation in Montana, in Browning. And so these 2 men are indigenous, and there was a big celebration going on in the town. And I had met them over here on the street corner and photographed them. And then, they just started riding away, and I was like, wait, I'm not done. And I went running after them, with a tripod. I had to have a tripod because it's dark. It's getting dark, and I wanted to have it in focus and not be all shaky. So I'm running after them, plop it down, get it. And when I look at it later, I'm like, I would have changed this or that about the composition. But then I'm like, oh my gosh. So we've got Jesus, the name above all name. Okay, is that, the religion that they grew up with? Maybe what they grew up with, but not from their heritage. And then we have Fistful of Dollars, which is the name of a Clint Eastwood movie, on a pawn Indian arts and crafts shop on a reservation. I'm like, okay, this is just a lot of layers. Where does this all go? Where does it come from? Where do I put this? How do I understand this? So then this is a shootout in Dodge City, Kansas. This was just in a burnt out trailer that was alongside the road in Arizona. And this was in a pelt store in Montana. And this was a point where I started to understand this project also, and that was that, okay, wait, what is the West? I mean, I grew up thinking of the West like this, but really it's very male, it's very masculine, it's very aggressive, it's very violent, the stories are. And here we've got this. Notice, sexual harassment in this area will not be reported. However, it will be graded. Really? So I felt that really sort of summed up a lot of things. And since then with this project, that's kind of the direction that I've been going, really looking at manifest destiny and trying to find those things on the landscape that point out the violence, the brutality. So this project is coming to a close, hopefully, and I hope it will be a book. I couldn't figure out where to go with it, but last summer I went to northern Minnesota and I photographed these women that call themselves water protectors. It's indigenous women, and they were spread out across northern Minnesota, and they were protesting. For the last 7 years, they've been protesting a pipeline going through northern Minnesota. It wasn't going through their actual reservation lands, but it's going through their treaty rights area. So the treaties that were signed gave them the right to hunt and fish and collect wild rice in this huge swath. But the pipeline if the pipeline leaks, that's it for them. Well, the pipeline was finished just a couple of weeks ago, and I don't think the oil has started flowing through it yet, but so they were protesting for 7 years. I don't know, they just really didn't get anywhere. Nobody paid attention. So I've photographed them and I've added them into the mix, so we'll see how it all comes out. And then lastly, I'll just say this, the other big project that I'm working on is called Tidewater, and it's about this area. And I'm looking at sea level rise and the history that is contained here as sort of the birthplace of the United States, of America, with Jamestown, 1607, the first settlement, first full-time English settlement. 1619, we all know, Point Comfort down in Hampton, where the first African Americans were brought in and sold as slaves to the colonists. So much Civil War, so much Revolutionary War. This is an area that's got so much history, so many layers of trauma on the landscape. And the sea is kind of taking it all back. So that's where I'm at right now. Questions, anybody?
I have a question. I noticed that some of your photographs are kind of like you capturing the moment, and then others you've had people pose. And I was just wondering if those two different kind of modes impact the storytelling through your perspective in different ways?
Not really, because they're all, you could say this work is documentary. It's documentary. Documentary is such a weird word that kind of relates to truth in a way, but it's not truth. No photography is truth. It's always, what did I put this in the frame or I put this in the frame? That's my decision. I'm telling the story. So actually this is posed. That I crept up to him, but that's posed. That I crept up. The white bread, that's posed. So a lot of them are posed. I'm very much into portraiture. I like to look at people. I like to hear their stories. I like that there's this small moment as a photographer that you get to walk into somebody else's world and hear what their story is. This is not an experience, I would never have met them. This is not an experience I would have in my everyday life, but yet I'm privileged to be able to walk in because I have this camera and they're interested in sharing their story.
Do you hope, I'm thinking about Eugene Smith and Minamata and mercury poisoning and all of that, and how that brought to world attention finally something that had been going on for more than a generation. Is it your hope that on some level the books and the work will perhaps bring attention to these issues in such a way that it might make a change? I mean, I know that's a very lofty thing.
Yeah. I mean, of course you would, but no, not really. I think that, whenever you make any kind of art or whatever you're trying to communicate, that you're communicating. I have something that I think is important and I want to tell you about it. Would I, in an important issue like climate change, would I hope that that would make you go, yeah, let's get everybody together and do something about it? Yes, but it's not really going to happen, and it's not necessarily my job. I think my job is more just kind of floating around and putting ideas out there. When I was in Minnesota with the water protectors, there was a woman, Carrie Pickett, who's a photographer, videographer. She had been working for 7 years with Winona LaDuke and all these women. That's her role. That is her role. And we all have different roles and different kind of communications and different things that we can fulfill. So, yeah. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Really does. I actually agree with you.
Anything else? Okay, so let me ask you a question. What'd you think? Did that make sense? Did that make you think of different ideas? Did that make you question history anymore? Great. Well, okay. I'm really thankful that you came here, and let me go through my whole spiel. So, here's to you guys. Okay. You're welcome. Thanks for having me.